welcome to the Mobility Innovators Podcast.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to welcome all listeners from around the world to Mobility Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Jaspal Singh. Mobility Innovator Podcast invite key innovators in the transportation and logistics sector to share their thoughts about the key changes in the sector, about their work, and what is their forecast for the future. Today, I'll be speaking with a very good friend. He works as an assistant professor of public transport at Delft University of Technology, and he's also the co-director of Smart Public Transport Lab. He has been involved in public transport projects for over 15 years and has expertise in public transport planning and design, as well as dealing with customer experience, service reliability, and big data. I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Niels van Oort, Assistant Professor of Public Transport at Delft University of Technology and co-director of Smart Public Transport Lab. Now it's time to listen and learn. Hello, Niels. Thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you on the show to share your knowledge with the listener.
Yes, thank you, Jaspal, for inviting me. Exciting to be here.
Yeah, we'll have fun for next 1 hour. So today I'll be spending time to learn more about you, your key research projects, their findings, and your perspective on future of mobility. You are doing a lot of exciting work. So I'm really curious to learn more from you. And to start with, I would like you to share a little more about yourself with our listener. Are there any interesting facts about your career that are not on your LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of my LinkedIn, to be honest. I like the platform to share and to learn. There are a couple of things not in there, I think. I'm a father of three great children, two small ones and one big one. And she's actually studying in another university, though. But it helps me also to learn from the other side of the table how students perceive lectures, etc. So that's interesting. And also what's not explicitly in there, I would say, I left the university a couple of times. I'm sort of a boomerang. I'm leaving after my master, after my PhD, but I always come back. And I think that's because I'm very curious how things, especially mobility and public transport, works. Yeah, and Delft University of Technology is a great environment to do research, to teach, to learn, and to share. So in the end, I proved to be a very poor predictor of my own career because I left and then I came back again, and here we are now. Actually, since a couple of years, I'm a full-time academic. I used to be a part-timer, but I'm excited in this job. I'm excited with our lab. And even more things to come, I would say.
That's great. No, we'll learn more about your lab and all in coming moments. Now, that's an interesting point to share about learning from your own kids and having a auditor at home who is auditing everything what you're teaching. So that's exciting. And I hope, she gave a good feedback about what's happening and what's not happening. It's amazing.
Indeed.
Also, you mentioned about you did your bachelor and master in traffic and transportation at Delft University of Technology. And also you did PhD on the topic of service reliability in public transport. And I know you are very passionate about that topic. I'm curious to learn about your finding from your PhD. And in today's world, how can cities improve the reliability of their service? Because that's the biggest challenge they're facing. And the customer also want more reliability and predictability. And what role does technology play in achieving this goal?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, I'm indeed very passionate about service reliability. At some point in my company, I wasn't allowed to talk about it anymore because I was apparently talking about it all day. But to be jokes aside, I think it's one of the crucial quality aspects of public transport, actually. And I think in general, passengers perceive it as a very important aspect. But the actual level of service reliability is not always as high as it should be. So I think that needs attention from multiple views. And I think one of my main conclusions and findings from my research was, first of all, to look at the passenger perspective. We talk about buses and trams and vehicles all day, but in the end, it's how the passenger perceives service reliability. That's one thing. And regarding the improvement of the level of service reliability, what I did in my thesis was to focus on the planning. In the end, it's the interaction of planning and operations that determines service reliability for passengers. And I found that there was much attention to operations, which is good, but I see plenty of opportunities also in the planning stage. If we develop poor schedules, if we develop poor networks, including infrastructure and service networks, then we cannot achieve service reliability, whatever we do during operations. And that's also where I think technology comes into play. A traditional one is focusing on traffic light priorities for public transport. We can do that nowadays with new technology and connected vehicles, etc., in a much more sophisticated and efficient way. So that helps. But also the tools and the models we are developing, I think, would be very helpful. One of the things I did research about and wrote some papers about is our transport models, which are great to predict ridership, depending on network input, for instance. But what I always say is all public transport operates on time in our models. That's not quite how it is in practice. So we are developing and developed approaches and algorithms to actually make these models a bit more like real life, where we can also assess the impact of and on service reliability. So it's either technology on the street, you could say, but I would also stress technology with regard to our tools and models, which can also be improved. And that's also what I like about, and I hope to provide as an academic, to provide insights and knowledge and parameters, for instance, to improve these models.
That's great. No, I really like your point about looking the service reliability from the passenger point rather than from the vehicle point, and also that everything starts with planning, but the operation need to execute it. So you can have a good planning, but poor operation, it will not work. And similarly, if you have a bad planning and good operation, it will not work. So it has to be balanced. Can you share a little more about the public transport lab at Delft University? You just mentioned that you are now looking after that as a co-director. And I also saw that you are working with a lot of partners from public transport agencies and industry member and all. Is there any plan to start working with startup and involve startup with this lab?
Yes, first let me explain a bit indeed about the lab. I'm very excited about it. I'm indeed co-directing the lab together with my colleague Odette Katz, and it's a great adventure, to be honest. And we launched this lab only in 2018, so we're still young, you could say. But we are nowadays with about 20 researchers, and also on an annual basis we have about 20 master students doing their master thesis in the field of public transport or shared mobility. So in that sense, we had a steep growth last years, and and it's great to because of this lab. I think we can we didn't have an explicit focus on public transport before. We did have public transport attention, but it was not combined and in a joint group. So also the sense of belonging was limited in that sense, and also our visibility was limited, I would say. So I was happy to create that one, and both with regard to research, but also with regard to teaching, and also our students now better can find us. And happy to say that our new generation of students seem to be more interested in more sustainable mobility. I think sustainability in general. Also thinking about the climate discussion, and also there's more interest from their side to go into more public transport specialized courses, for instance. And in the end, that's also how we could help the industry to provide excellent new talents for them. And that's also what is important in these partnerships you mentioned, because what I did before starting this lab, I made a round in the industry, so to speak, drinking coffee or some other drinks with many people to learn about the challenges of society. Because for me, my main drive in my work is contributing and trying to make a societal impact. I believe that public transport plays an important role in addition to active modes and other things. But to make a real societal impact, I think we should, as academics, we should first listen to society to know what the challenges are. So that's what we did. And actually, those were great meetings with multiple agencies, operators, consultancy, all levels, from CEO to the policy makers, etc. I learned a lot there about what we should actually do as TU Delft and Smart Public Transport Lab. And actually, during these talks, we also were thinking, okay, this is what we should do. We should get more insights and help, for instance, with mobility as a service, with emerging modes, with service reliability. And then let's discuss, how are we going to do this? And then we came up with these partnerships where we closely work with operators, authorities, etc., via students, but also more in-depth via PhD programs, postdoc programs, which is great, because it's really what I like in the gap between science and practice. From our side, from academia, helping society. And so far, startups now I must say startups are getting also come in the loop as well. It's a different world, as you know, of course. Some come and go, so it's harder to get a sustainable relationship with. But it's getting there, and also our students, they like it. It's nice that it's nowadays, fortunately, we're going hopefully back forever to live lectures. And it's nice to discuss with the students also how they look at the world. And for them, these startups and these new modes, that's their daily life, so you could say. So they also are very interested in these companies to work with, etc., which also helps us to get a little bit of nowadays trends, etc.
Oh, yeah. No, you raise a couple of very interesting points. One, you mentioned about getting feedback from the society. So that human-centric approach. A load of public transit agencies or operator, they do planning without understanding what customer need and what customers are looking. And the second point you mentioned about the bringing science and practice together, because that's what sometimes people feel like academia is doing something which is not relevant for the practical world. But that's a great point. And startup, they come and go. That's how their life is. Some of them flourish, some of them die. That's the different world altogether.
Great. As long as we learn along the way from that, then I think it's helpful.
Oh yeah, that's true. Now coming back to your research, you co-author a paper in 2020 to promote the awareness of LightRail system, and I'm a big fan of LightRail mode. I love your 5E model for building a LightRail system. Would love to know what those 5Es are. And I agree with you, like all the modes are relevant, and depending on the context, one may be more appropriate than others. But sadly, LightRail could not able to expand in a big way. At UITP also, there was research done, and we didn't find a big expansion of LightRail system around the globe. And the reason for that, you also covered in your study, the failure of a lot of LightRail system, including one in Netherlands, the Regio Tram. And in fact, I'm in Canada, and I know in Ottawa, they are facing big issue with the LightRail system. How do you think the technology can help to run and operate LightRail system in the city efficiently, and how they can help to promote LightRail more and more around the globe?
Yeah, that's a very good aspect. Yeah, and starting with LightRail, indeed, LightRail is one tool in our toolbox to hopefully contribute to these 5E as we mentioned them, and depending on the context and the goals. Sometimes a BRT is better, sometimes a metro, sometimes something else, and that's also what I would like to stress, because I see, I wrote a book about LightRail, so then people think you are a fan of LightRail, so the only solution you will talk about is LightRail. And indeed, I see a lot of opportunities for LightRail, and it's important, I think, from our perspective to get more knowledge about when and how to apply. But I don't like these discussions, so it's that people already know the solution before the problem is there. Whatever your problem is, I give you BRT, or I give you LightRail, or whatever. And that's one of the challenges, I think, in the public transport industry. where I would say it's even wider than public transport, including active modes, for instance. Yeah, and these 5 E's are relevant. Maybe good to tell a bit about them. It shows actually the value, the wider benefits of well-designed and operated public transport, including LightRail. It's not only about the first E, effective mobility, bringing people from A to B in a comfortable and fast, reliable manner, but it's also about efficient cities, efficient use of space. I like the term mass transit in that sense, because I think for mass transport, you need something else than individual vehicles if you want to do it in a space efficient way. It's about the economy, it's about the environment, and last but not least, it's also about equity, social inclusion. So that framework helps us to, in the case of LightRail, also to stress, depending on your goals, make sure that you show what the benefits could be. And in that sense, also, if we talk about technology, also here, I think technology is not only about the stuff on the street, so to speak. It's also about the tooling and the models. For instance, societal cost and benefit analysis, a very popular tool in many parts of the world. Yeah, we found out that many of these E's are not explicitly included. So if you only look at the cost of things and you don't look at the wider benefits, it's hard to get a good discussion about the usability of a specific solution. And even I would say that sometimes technology is a reason why these projects are not succeeding.
Yes.
We saw in what we did in our book, we compared 61 LightRail projects. Sometimes these projects are so technocratic, and I'm from Delft University of Technology, so I like that part from a personal perspective. But the tricky thing with LightRail is that the society, the inhabitants, they are not completely familiar with the term. And if it gets too technocratic, then you don't get the support from your municipality or city you want to. So sometimes even technology should be, in general, technology should serve the needs of the people instead of the other way around. So that's also an important point. Yeah. Of course, there's a lot of technology that could help implementing good LightRail systems. It's about good infrastructure, well-designed, a good interaction and respect for other modes, especially in another case in the Netherlands, field project. There was the project didn't take into account the cyclists in a good way. And if you're in the Netherlands, if you have a fight with the cycling community, then your project is gone. And I agree there. So you should take that into account with good designs, and also, technology could help there, I would say.
Yeah, no, but that's a great point. Like if you have a problem with cyclists, you are facing a challenge, because in North America and other places, it's the car which dominate the street, and you always keep fighting with the car owners. But in a way, it's a good problem. And you rightly mentioned about the LightRail system. The technology sometimes is overplayed role and sometimes can be a deterrence or hindrance for implementing the LightRail system. The funny thing, in India, they are trying to sell the LightRail system to cities, because many cities are looking for metro, and they are trying to sell the LightRail system to the city. So they actually rename the LightRail into Metro Light. So people don't care what solution you are implementing. They just care about what word you are using.
Yeah, but sometimes this framing of systems could be very valuable. Or so I like the idea, actually.
Yeah,
because I think if you ask 10 normal people, so to speak, what LightRail is, probably you'll get 12 answers.
Yeah, that's why they call it Metro Light. So it's a metro, but a light version of metro.
Like it, actually.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You wrote a book on LightRail system and comparing 61 system, but I know that you're not only working on LightRail system. You're doing so many interesting projects. And one of the projects which I'm very curious to learn more about is digital inequality in transport services. You mentioned that digitalization can cause more disadvantages than advantages. And I was like a bit shocked to read the statement, but I said like, okay, let's understand from you. I agree that many transit agencies are looking to implement new technology to see if they can cut the wages, physical infrastructure, staff, discontinue the cash tickets and etc. And the purpose of technology is also to have a good streamlined system rather than running two parallel systems in the world. You did a detailed study on the consequence of digitalization in transport services on people through the lens of digital inequality. And I love that point because you mentioned about learning from society. Would you mind sharing your finding and recommendation about this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think this is a relatively new topic on our agenda. Also, inclusive mobility. So the fifth E I was just referring to of equity. We used to say in general when I was presenting about the 5 E's and then the fifth E, we see issues with equity in the US, for instance, or in France in the banlieues, and in the Netherlands it wasn't a big problem yet, and I think it's still not very big, but at least fortunately it gets more attention because we also face inequality, and in the end most people, not all, but think that everybody should have similar opportunities in society, and mobility could play quite a role there, provide accessibility to schools and hospitals and jobs, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to see that that we are also moving more into that domain, because also from a scientific perspective, there's quite still a lot of research gaps there to deal with, both with regarding how to measure it, how to improve it, etc. So that's nice. And this project about digital equality is in cooperation with the Dutch Ministry of Transport. So that's also nice, a nice setup, I would say. And regarding the findings, the first finding was actually the start of the project was, for me, striking that in our country we have about 70 million inhabitants, and over 2.5 million of them above 16 are not able to read or write well, or are digitally have limited digital skills. So that's a huge group.
Yeah.
And that's not only the elderly, that's not only the people from another country, that's actually amongst whole society. So actually starting with who are facing issues and to what extent, that's already part of the findings, I would say. We see multiple levels of inaccessibility. Could be because indeed you have no digital skills, you don't know how to handle a smartphone, but it could also be that you don't have sufficient funds to buy a smartphone, or to have a subscription to a smartphone. Those are also hurdles to take. So there are multiple levels in this domain. What's also interesting now, we are also looking at with Anne Durand, who is a PhD in our lab, at solutions. So and indeed, as you say, there are many benefits, totally agree, of digitalization that helps us, that makes things more efficient, less expensive. But it comes with a price. So there's a new trade-off actually there. So how important do you think that digital equality is? Because probably they will come with a price, reducing the efficiency gains you just managed to achieve. So it's also what, for me, also in this 5E model is important. So dear society, what do you want to achieve, and how much do you want to pay for it, and then pay in a wider sense, I would say, because probably it will come with a price, and you don't need to completely turn back all the benefits of digitalizations. Hopefully not, because again, I think digitalization has a lot of benefits, but maybe a bit of it, like people around to ask too. If you completely remove them from your bigger stations, etc., you might run into issues. So that's a balancing act, and that's where we actually are now to find out and to learn about it.
Quite surprising for me to understand 2.5 million people, because that's representing around 8 to 9% of the population, which is not a small group, like you mentioned.
Indeed.
And you can't exclude them from these services, and you can't neglect them, because probably they are the one who need these services or these facility the more than others.
That's even more ironic, you would say, that they might need these systems even more than others.
It's interesting you're working on this topic and giving some solution. Would love to see how it will evolve. And I think it can be a learning for a lot of transit agencies around the world, because everybody think that everybody can buy a smartphone and everybody can have data packages and all, but that's probably not a right assumptions. Probably you need to talk to your customer. And then again, I come back to that point about human-centric approach. It's actually, with technology, we are losing that mindset, how to serve everybody.
Yeah, and another point to stress here in this kind of research, it's if you talk to your direct colleagues, to your own bubble of people who are completely aware of everything in general, have a good income, a steady income, etc. Yeah, that's not full society, I would say. So that's
That's
also
true.
important to get out of your bubble and which is not easy, but we had a discussion lately about travel cost reimbursements from your job, which
Yeah.
is in general for us a topic you at least could discuss with your management. But there are plenty of jobs where this is out of the discussion. So if you ask about it, you lose your job and they find somebody else. So that's also, yeah, it's tricky to only think from your own perspective in that sense.
Actually, very interesting point to raise, because I was now thinking a lot of transit agencies and a lot of agencies industry are doing survey online, but it means then you are taking people who has all the facility and getting a very biased views rather than doing survey of whole society.
Yeah, for this research, we are now actually performing live interviews, which was also tricky during COVID, by the way. But
Yeah.
and we are also exploring new research opportunities more. We tend to be in the quantitative domain, you could say. But for this topic, you should also use more qualitative approaches. And and that's interesting to discover about the value there.
That's a great point. My next question is a bit longer, and it's important too, because it's about future. And one thing I want to check, like, are you a big fan of Elon Musk or not? He's quite popular among the new generation. And recently on the Tesla earning call, he mentioned some interesting point, and also I would say some scary point. I read it some point for you. He said that effectively in long term, every car will be fully self-driving car. He feels that self-driving is good for society as asset utilization. A person drive his and her car for 1.5 hour a day on average, which is around 10 to 12 hour a week. So people will have more free time. Like, you don't need to drive, so vehicle will drive itself, so you can do something on your own. The second point, he mentioned that a lot of cars are in parking lot, and we are spending money not just driving the car but storing them all over the place. And I agree. I hate cars because 95% of their lifetime they are in parking. But he's saying we can get rid of a lot of parking lots, not by removing the car, but by putting all the car on the road all the time. So you don't need to remove car from away from the road. So they will keep running on the road. And it will increase the traffic for sure. And you analyze an autonomous mobility very closely as a first and last mile connectivity. What do you think about this scenario in which everyone has a self-driving car and it can be on road all the time? Maybe we can repurpose all the parking spaces, or maybe we can repurpose the use of cars. Do you think it's a good scenario or it's a scary scenario? What do you think about this?
Yeah, good questions, Jaspal. Yeah, starting with your first question about whether I'm a fan. I'm not a big fan per se. We'll come back to that later. However, what I like is to have these people. Society needs people who are making next steps and who dream extremely in general. But it's good to have people who think further than next year or next 10 years or whatever. And
yeah.
It could be inspiring indeed for new generations to challenge yourself, to challenge society, and to come up with new solutions to issues instead of continuing with the existing solutions. So in that sense, it's an interesting person for sure. And when you talked about autonomous vehicles, it's a sort of a dream. You get more free time. As a public transport user, I would say I use public transport already, because then I can read a book or can do some work. So it's not per se autonomous vehicles needed for that. And also to get rid of parking space in general, replace it by more green or more space for children to play. And I think nobody disagrees there. The question though is how to get there. And with regard to autonomous vehicles, I'm not sure. But it's in social media discussions, it's always black and white. It's either you're in favor or not. And I think I'm afraid that as a scientist, we always say it's in the middle and it depends. So I see opportunities, and there are already opportunities for self-driving technology. I think first of all, we had self-driving metros already for ages, you could say, and also in the Netherlands we had a shuttle service, first last mile to a metro station.
Yeah,
for over 20 years already, which is I think it's near Rotterdam, which is a good example of how it could work. However, I don't see our future being fully automated. I think there are still, especially in dense areas with cyclists, with pedestrians, I don't see it happen. And I also don't see the need for it to happen. That's also important. Why are we going into that direction? And there are benefits, obviously, but I think I expect that these will mainly be visible on highways. I think that would be a good place for automation, and also in dedicated shuttles to and from public transport, car parks, airports, all that kind of things. Because I must say that we do a lot of research, by the way, in automation, which is great to learn about. And again, there's a lot of potential applications there. For the inner cities or a campus here, it's if you see all the bicycles in the pre-COVID phase, these autonomous vehicles will never get through here. That will be impossible, I think, from a safety perspective. And I must say that I found the developments going quite slow. I remember some people, maybe Elon Musk, I'm not sure, but I think their prediction was that in 2020, all our cities would be full of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, many people made that prediction long back, but
last time when I looked, I didn't see one. So it's getting slow, and also due to the safety restrictions, etc., the vehicles itself are also relatively slow, you could say. And then, in our case, you get a bit of a competition between the shuttle and the bicycle. We did a lot of research with regard to passenger acceptance and passenger preferences. And there is a market share to be expected for autonomous shuttles, for sure. And also the business case is, of course, interesting there. But we also see, it's also a bit of, depending on the weather, I must admit, as we speak, it's raining. So that's a bit of a tricky thing for the bicycle. But in general, the expectations are that the model share of bicycles will still be highest compared to shuttles. But we also found, for instance, that for first-class travelers, business travelers in general, for them, a shuttle might be more convenient and affordable. So there is a market there. But I think in general, my take is that the expectations are overrated.
Yeah, no, you are right. Like we already have fully autonomous vehicle in form of a public transit. They don't need parking space, and you don't need to drive. You can read your book, you can meet people, you can drink your coffee with people. And so sometimes it's important to look in the past to find answer for future. We are so focused on future that sometimes we forget what we did in past to solve these problems and all. I move on to next point from this scary world to optimistic scenario about mobility as a service. Mobility as a service, now is kind of a buzzword, and everybody see as a next hero of public transportation. I know you are working on an interesting MaaS project that focus on the behavioral aspect of individual consumer. A lot of companies, a lot of people are working on the technology side. And again, they lose focus about what society think about these new technology. What's your thought on MaaS, and how can city encourage people to use it?
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, indeed, my take in general is, it's also what I teach my students. New technology is great, but always ask you the question, what's in it for society? What's in it for the passenger? And I think MaaS can provide benefits there. I think it would be very convenient, actually, with the continuous growing landscape of available modes. Modes come and go, but are added also. So it's helpful to have a one platform to pay, to get information, to book them, etc. So I think that's an obvious benefit. But every now and then I feel a bit like a mythbuster, so to speak, with all these new technology that's in my view is overestimating the benefits a bit. When I started this smart public transport lab, some people were actually saying to me, why are you going to do research in public transport? Because MaaS means the end of public transport. That was told to me a couple of years ago. And I think what now all researchers and practical experiences show is actually public transport is the core of MaaS, I would say. So it's not replacing it; it's actually enriching it. You could say. So what's in a name, and how things can change.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what MaaS could provide, indeed, because all the benefits of public transport we were discussing here only are there if it's a well-designed and well-operated system. And yeah, to be honest, that's not the case for many public transport systems all over the world. There are many hurdles. It's hard to find your way if you're not well trained for public transport. It's sometimes hard to find your way, transferring, getting information, how to pay. And I think MaaS is especially helpful in that sense to lower these thresholds, to make it a more attractive alternative for people, and maybe stimulate them to make a move from their individual car towards public transport, including bicycles, shared cars, etc. I think that's what MaaS could provide us.
That's interesting point you mentioned about, like, people were thinking MaaS will replace public transit, but actually MaaS is more dependent on public transit than any other mode. And society need to rethink how the benefit can be generated from MaaS rather than just looking from the technology side. And I think that's a core. I am getting this core message from you is anything you do, whether it's operational infrastructure, whether it's technology, whether building new modes and transit, the important thing is who's the customer and how they will get benefit out of it, rather than thinking about the fancy keywords and buzzword. I love that. Now I want to talk about cycles, and you are from the country and city which is like known for the cyclists and the number of cycles in the cities, and it's a popular mode. And you conducted a lot of research about first and last mile connectivity and how the impact of cycling infrastructure can improve the public transportation accessibility and all. So I would like to hear your thought about these new mode of transportation, such as e-scooters, e-bike, bike sharing, scooter sharing, and so on. I mean, now I forgot, like, it's very difficult to keep track of what's a new buzzword is coming. What are the way in which these modes are redefining some of the traditional options?
We live in exciting times, isn't it, from a mobility perspective, because the landscape has changed quite quickly, actually. I remember going to Paris at some point, and then the city was flooded with shared bicycles, and the year after, we couldn't find two similar bikes again with my wife, and the city was flooded with these e-scooters, standing e-scooters. So the developments are so quick. Sometimes hard for us as researchers to catch up, because our research takes time, and before you know, it's already over. But it's great, and also the younger generation likes these modes, and also is very interesting in helping us investigating. So in general, you would say, the more options, the better for the individual customer. However, in this case, there's also the question, what's in it for society, and then there's a trade-off and a balance to be made. Because I think in general, these modes could provide us multiple benefits. But I think with regard to the second E, efficient cities, so space usage, I think on the one hand, they could help. A standing e-scooter is much more space efficient than a car or even a regular bike. However, I think it's already proven now that some regulations need to be in place, preventing your city to be flooded with these vehicles, making also your cities less accessible for people with difficulties to walk, for instance, because if the streets are full of these things lying around. So there are some obvious challenges, I would say. What also strikes me in this context, I think in general they could help public transport in first last mile, for instance.
Yeah.
But they could also compete with public transport. So are they completing or competing public transport? That's what we say often. And that's an interesting research topic, and also interesting to discuss with operators. And I'm very happy to see that in the Netherlands, there's a trend now going on that the public transport operators don't see the bicycle as a competitor anymore, which I think is in general a good approach. Of course, there are trips that could be replaced by a bicycle, but I think in general, societal view from society, that's much better. And then as a public transport operator, you could focus on the trips that need to be made by public transport. So in the end, it's a balance of multiple modes, I would say. And it's a bit similar for these other emerging modes. Although what we learn from our research is that especially these e-scooters, so both standing and sitting e-scooters, it's general, the young generation using them. It's fun in a way. They don't have, in our cities, they don't have a high share. And I must say that in the Netherlands, these standing scooters are not allowed yet.
Okay.
So maybe that's also helpful that we first could learn a bit from other countries worldwide, what's happening. But their share is limited, but the visibility is high because you see scooters, the sitting scooters all over, multiple brands. And then again, how many apps do you need to install to get access? So I think we're not in a mature phase at all. And I hope we can find the best way to find the optimal mix of all these modes, including public transport and regular biking, probably with some limitations with regard to parking and that kind of things. Then I think if we manage that well, we can really get the best out of all these modes. But it takes some time. In the end, we learned a lot because we're also advocating these modes sometimes from a sustainability perspective. And if we have boats full of bikes here from China, for instance, in the campus we had Chinese bikes, which were great actually, but now they're all gone. So all these bikes were produced, they were transported. It would be interesting to also have a life cycle analysis of that. Is that sustainability? Is that sustainable or not? I think asking the question is already answering it. So we should get to the next level, I would say.
Yeah. No, you rightly mentioned like these modes are coming so fast and going so fast. You don't sometimes even wonder what should you do research about, because by the time you start the research, they are gone and something new start. And I think cities are becoming like a now live lab. So many things are coming up and people are just experimenting and seeing what will stay and what will vanish in 2-3 years time.
That's also what I like, because we do a lot of theoretical research, of course. But one of my dreams is also put everything there on the station and just see what people will do. How will they react? What are they willing to pay? For what trips will they use what mode? It's indeed one big lab, one living lab. Which is great for us as researchers, I think.
Yeah, it's great for everybody to understand what people will like and do it. Other point I want to check with you, and I know because I met you when in Delhi, you talked a lot about big data and all. So you are very much obsessed with transit data and always look for new way to experiment with it. I really like your point about putting all the mode at the station, let people decide and choose, and you can do a lot of research about that. You conducted research in Netherlands on smart car data and vehicle GPS data to learn about the customer behavior. Why do you believe city failed to properly use data? Because there is tons of data available, but cities generally can't able to use it. And do you believe academia or technology firm can play a role here?
Yeah, to start with the last question, yes, I think I'm convinced actually. I think also that happened to some extent in our country and beyond. Yeah, in our lab, I just mentioned that we are now exploring also qualitative research methods, but data in general is our oxygen. We use data for most of our researchers about data, indeed, smart card data, AVL data, platform planner data. The world is full of data, and I think there's actually a role for us to explore the opportunities. Also great with students, because you don't know. It's not a project like that you start and you know where you will end. It's an exploring adventure, you could say, and that's always a bit risky for cities or for companies. But for scientists, yeah, that's actually what we do, and we learn, and hopefully we get some positive results. But sometimes we get negative results, which are also valuable to learn from. They are less sexy to share or whatever, but and in that sense, I think academia is a good place to do these explorations. And that's also what we did last 10 years, maybe. I was then, in those days, I was also working as a consultant. So I was quite well involved in what was happening in the industry. And via my role as academic, I could indeed learn from other countries, also from the US and Asia. But also indeed, yeah, learning by doing. And I think one of the main things we found was that people were not aware of the value of all that data. So the question, they were not aware of the improved business cases or the improved customer service, the improved decision making. And what we showed them actually that value. And then they were, because it always comes with a price. And then people say, yeah, I have to pay or to put time or effort. And what will it yield? And that's what we showed them. We inspired them, I think. These are things you could do with all the data. And then I think industry, at least in the Netherlands, many operators are now working themselves with all these methods, not only because of us, by the way, but at least I think we contributed a bit. And that's a great role. And we should always be front runners from academia. And once it gets mainstream, then it's perfect that other companies or whatever continue there. So we're now also investigating new sources like planner data. So how are people planning their journeys? Could we use that data to predict ridership, for instance, that kind of things?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And actually, that's kind of linked with my next question, because I don't see you purely as an academician, because you are, like the line you mentioned about learning by practice is more important than learning by just doing research. So going back in the society and going with the city and talking to people, that's a way to learn. And that's your life journey too. You work as a full-time academic, but you previously left university, like you mentioned in earlier 2 times, and work with public transport operator and consultant. So I would say you have seen now every aspect of the business. So you work with the authority, you work with the operator, you work with the consulting side, and now you're working with academia and running the smart mobility lab. In what way do you think academia role is more relevant or becoming more important in this changing world, when there are so many things are happening every day? And I really agree with you when you said that these students are the next generation leaders and executive and innovators in the mobility sector. So what role you think academia will play or playing in the society?
Yeah, that's a good point, and we discuss a lot more and more, fortunately, also here in Delft, about societal impact and the awareness that we are here for a good reason, not doing research only. That's of course the fundament of what we are doing, but there's more to gain. And now, first of all, it's education. education of young people, young talents to join the industry in whatever position and to make a difference there. I think that's maybe the biggest contribution we do, but also trainings. I'm also involved in trainings for professionals, etc. So in that sense, I would stress that. With regard to research, we just discussed about exploring new things. The things we are not sure about whether they will make it or not, where companies probably won't put their money and effort on. I think then science is relevant to step in. Evaluations of what happened. It's not very popular to evaluate failed projects like we did with the LightRail book. We don't have a tradition actually to evaluate things. Could be a bit confronting or whatever. And I think we want to learn from projects. We need to evaluate them. I think it's also an important role as an academic. And what I would like to do is to improve the level of decision making, evidence-based decision making. I would like to contribute to that. And I know nowadays our world is more dominated by social media-based decision making. You could say there's a lot of opinions going around on YouTube, etc. Still, I hope that also some decision makers trust on science and continue there. And I believe that that's an important role. And last but not least, also in contact with you, for instance, when we met in India the other day, is connecting worldwide knowledge to each other. Because most countries tend to look at the daily operations, their own country or region even, while there are so many things going on all over the world. Good things that fail, but from all we can learn. And as an academic, I think we are in a good position to be aware of things happening all over the globe, and also to connect it and distract the learningful lessons there.
Well, that's a great point to mention. Is so much innovation happening all around us, and you never know from where the next innovation will come from. Will it be Asia? Will it be Africa? Will it be MENA region or Latin America or North America? You never know from where the new innovation will come. So that's a great point now to move to our next section. So we talk a lot about mobility and all, but now I want to talk a little more about you. So we have this rapid fire question round. And the idea is that we'll ask you 5 questions and you need to give your answer very quickly. So simply say what comes to your mind. So if you're ready, then my first question is about if you were not in the mobility sector, which is hard to believe, or in academia, what other profession you would have selected?
That's very hard to believe, just Paul, because I think if you ask my friends when I was a small kid, they will always say that I would end up in public transport, and here I am. So it's not a surprise for nobody that I'm in public transport or in mobility. However, I also told you that I'm not very good in predicting my career, so who knows? But to be honest, I was interested in public transport systems, connections, timetable, passenger behavior for all my life. I did have some other ideas as a kid. I'm not sure how serious I could go for those careers. One was becoming a magician.
Oh.
So you watch me. And the other one was a radio DJ. This podcast is probably the closest I get to that one. But on a more serious note, the only thing I can imagine is maybe in the field of logistics, freight, which is also very, but that's still quite close to my comfort zone, you would say.
Yeah, so you are made for transit, and then transit is made for you. So that's great. You travel all around, like many countries around the world, and I'm pretty sure first thing you must be observing there is how the city works, how people move and all. So which is your favorite city in the world?
I'm indeed in a lucky position that we, as an academic, you're able to travel all over the world actually, and to learn from all these cities, and to also enjoy these cities. And you can ask my family about me being in a new city that I'm checking out the public transport networks the first thing when I arrive. and try to lure them into new lines I want to explore. But in general, I think, there's so many beautiful cities and inconvenient cities, but I was thinking about this, and I think not so far away from here is Paris, convenient by high-speed train. We have quite some contacts with the French railways. So I had some good reasons to go there every now and then before COVID. And for me, it's a great city. And similar actually with Madrid in Spain. It's the weather is a bit better, I would say, than here. The food is much better than here, I would also say. So I also like that one. And last on my list, I think, is I had the opportunity to have some time with Professor Graham Curry in Melbourne, Monash University, a couple of years ago, and it was a great time. He has a great group of public transport. I think he's the leading academic in our world. Very great guy and inspiring. And I must say that also Melbourne is quite a convenient place to live. I don't see myself living in another country. I must say for me, I moved from the south of the country to the west in the Netherlands. So that's only 1.5 hours. That was already a big leap for me. So I don't see myself in another country living, but going there, enjoying that's great.
See, you have a long list, and I think it's increasing every year.
There's still some on my bucket list, I can tell you.
No, you mentioned about like any city you go and check out the public transit system. So now you have, I would say you are one of the experienced travel of public transit system around the world. So that's my next question, which city has the best transit network in the world for you?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I listened to your first podcast with Mohammed from UITP, and he had a good point about best practices versus good practices, actually. I remember that one, which is actually, he didn't like to talk about best practices, because I totally agree. There are good practices all over the world. Let's combine them into one system, sort of ideal. But going a bit more tangible, I think what I like, for instance, in France, I like the aesthetics and the link to urban planning of public transport, in general with LightRail or also with BRT. So they have this wider view as we promote by the 5E model, I think. In Germany, the systems are very robust and functional, I would say. So that would be already a good combination of the two. But from outside Europe, I think Asia is by far my favorite. I had the opportunity to go to Hong Kong 10 years ago. Also went to Singapore a couple of years ago. Yeah, these systems are, I think, the best as far as I have seen in the world. I really like them. Very convenient from a passenger experience.
Yeah, they are one of the best system, I would say, around the world, and good city. And I think these best system make the cities good also. That's what our politicians need to understand. A good city.
That's in the end how it works. Public transport is not a goal in itself. It should contribute to your societal goals, to your city, to your regions, isn't it?
Yeah. Now the question I want to learn from you is, like, you are closely watching startup space and all. What's your favorite startup in the mobility sector?
Yeah, there are multiple interesting ones, and try to get track of them. But there's one I would like to stress here. It's I think they're only operating in the Netherlands, I must say. It's Bondi.city, if you like to pay them a visit. They are operating shared bicycle systems in the Netherlands in a couple of cities, and we cooperated with them. They have tons of data, but they also have a business to run, so they also don't have the time and the opportunities. So we had students helping them out there, and it was a great cooperation. And it's two young guys, students still, or I think around 25, and they started this company with the two of them. They operate these shared bicycle systems in multiple cities in the Netherlands, and I really admire that entrepreneurship. That's so inspiring, and these are two great guys. They work 24/7, I think.
Oh yeah.
But it's really inspiring to meet them and to discuss with them about the future of mobility. So I would mention them here as my favorite.
Oh, that's great. And I'll put their link in the show notes so that other people can also see about that. So we are at kind of coming to then, and that is the last question I always ask my guest, and it's important, is like, if you could change one thing about your life, what would it be?
Yeah, I must admit, this is a good question to think about I'm quite satisfied with how things are going. I think I'm in a fortunate position, and maybe that's also what I would like to change, not per se for myself, but I think in general, I think distribution of wealth and health is quite uneven in the world, and that's sad to see. And also a bit more looking at, we talked about traveling, we talked about live lectures. And if I could change anything, let's get rid of COVID and get back to our lives, learn from the pandemic. Let's learn the lessons and the opportunities. But I think most people are facing, for me, it's annoying. But for many people's worldwide, it's more than annoying, and it's life-threatening. And let's hope we can leave this stage forever, I would say.
No, that's both are great point about uneven health and uneven wealth. That's a big point, and a lot of people feel that pandemic is annoying, but they need to think about like it's changing many people's lives. So we should feel lucky that we are sitting safe and healthy.
If you are complaining about, which I do a lot, I must say, about working from home, that apparently implies that you have a home and you have a job. I think that's a nice sentence.
That's a great point.
I found somewhere on social media, I must say.
That's a great point. No, thank you so much, Niels. And I think I really enjoyed this conversation, really learned from you. And like I said, you are not academician, you are a practitioner. And I love that because all your points are about human-centric approach, evidence, science-based work rather than doing assumptions and presumptions. And in the end, what you mentioned, working from home means that you are blessed with home and with work, which is a great thing. So I really enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot from your experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. We will be inviting some other inspiring guests in coming week. You can subscribe us online to get the notification for the next episode. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us to spread our message. If you have any feedback and suggestion for this podcast, please do write to us at info@mobility-innovators.com.